Okay. Oh my gosh, Lindsay. Long time. Long time. I have so many fond memories. As I was reading your book, your description of your time with your dad, and he's telling you how to throw a baseball and wanted you to play basketball. Tell me about
Hmm.
that time because I have fond memories. I specifically remember this with you.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I feel like my childhood was pretty idyllic, like, growing up in university place and lots of kids around, lots of families and, just always fun stuff happening. So, yeah, I mean, I was the only child for 10 years. And so I don't know, maybe I think my dad maybe secretly wanted a boy or maybe not so secretly. I don't know. But, you know, he says that I actually came to him saying that I wanted to learn how to play softball. So I don't know. But yeah, he did try to encourage me to play other sports like basketball, which I was never interested in. But definitely he was, the one out in the street, teaching me how to throw and catch and hit and, sort of instilling that mantra into me that, you can't throw like a girl, and, you got to be tough and, all those fun things. So definitely sticks with you.
You were a hell of a ball player. I mean, I remember how hard you used to throw. Just attending softball games that you guys were playing. You were quite the athlete, and so I find it hilarious in your book that you're saying some of the girls were scared to catch your throws.
Yeah, that was early on, I think at like elementary school age. And it's funny because my best friend, Laura, who, um, our very first day of seventh grade, so our first day of junior high, I met her and she walks up to me and says, I remember you from softball and I hated you. We went to different elementary schools. And then it was like, oh, okay, well, do you want to come over after school? And then that was it. Like we were best friends from there on.
So I went to elementary school with Laura. Which elementary school did you go to?
I went to Chambers.
You went to Chambers. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And did you guys go to Sunset or
Yeah, we went
Narrows
to
View?
Sunset.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Laura was always a superb athlete as well. So you
Hmm.
guys were kicking ass on the softball field.
Yeah.
And you still
Yeah.
keep in touch. I see a lot of Facebook posts and things with you guys together.
Yeah, it's funny because Laura and Lori are two of my close friends from school, and actually they're probably the two people that I keep in touch with from high school. I don't really see anybody else from school.
Did you go to the 30th anniversary? I did not go.
No, I didn't go to the reunion. I actually one of my good friends turned 50, and so I went to her 50th birthday party, which was the same day, so I missed it.
Okay. But
But I did get to see Laura because she was in town. So she went to it.
and then you live where do you live in town? Because in the book you described the Narrows Bridge.
Yeah, I live pretty close to the Narrows Bridge, so sort of off Jackson.
And then your
Yeah.
husband, he's still serving. Yes?
No, he's retired. He retired about 2 years ago from the police department.
Okay. What is he doing now?
He works for the state for the Criminal Justice Training Commission, so the police academy up in Burien. He works up there as an assistant director.
Describe your new career because I know that you mentioned in the book that separation anxiety, that fear of leaving the police force. Describe your new
Mhm.
career.
Well, it's kind of changed. I mean, I've done several things since leaving the police department. So I went to work for the attorney general's office, and I was there for maybe 4 years in total. And I did a few different roles as an investigator there. So I worked on the sexual assault kit initiative for a few years, and that was clearing the backlog of untested sexual assault kits. And then I worked in the HITS unit, which is the homicide investigation and tracking system unit. And we basically keep track of all the homicides in the state of Washington. Um, and then from there, I left the attorney general's office and got my real estate license. And I actually went to work for Redfin for about like a little under a year maybe. And then I decided, I don't think, as much as I love real estate and I love houses, um, selling them and being a salesperson is not really my jam. So I decided that was not for me. So then I went back to the attorney general's office, and I actually worked in the civil rights division for about 8 months as an investigator. And then I got my current job at a nonprofit. So it's a global nonprofit, and I basically act as a subject matter expert to other law enforcement agencies around the country who have federal grants, and so I help them with their cold case projects, DNA related things.
So where are we when it comes to trying to get all 50 states on board? Are we there? Where are we on tracking that so far?
Well, I don't. As far as like sexual assault kit testing, or
Yeah, in your book, you were really advocating for trying to provide more awareness, more communication amongst the states and precincts. Where are we on
yeah,
that progress?
I think we're kind of all over the board. I mean, so the testing of the previously untested sexual assault kits is sort of one issue, and I think that most states have gotten a pretty good handle on that. The other side of that coin, which I don't think many states have gotten a handle on, is the missing offender samples in the national DNA database. And so those are the people that have been convicted of qualifying offenses, and for whatever reason, there's a long laundry list of reasons why their DNA was never collected and put into the database for the purpose of solving cases. And so that is still really, I think, in its infancy as far as understanding on a national level that that is a problem. I think there are a lot of assumptions by government officials that, well, of course, that like DNA testing's been around since the 90s, and most states have had laws on the books since the early 90s about collecting DNA samples. And it just seems like common sense, right? Like if you were convicted of a rape or a murder and you went to prison, of course your DNA would be collected and put into the database. And the reality is that that's not necessarily the case. Lots of reasons why that doesn't always happen. And because of that, you know, crimes go unsolved. And I think that not only can we solve crimes by getting more samples in, but we can actually prevent crimes from happening.
You, while I was reading your book, I was thinking about you mentioned Alexandria, Virginia, and coming out here to do some work. Did any of that evolve or involve legislation or lobbying or trying to bring awareness to Congress? What was that interaction for you to come out here to Alexandria?
So that particular trip was just a case review for Jennifer Bastian and Michelle Welch's case, and that was like 2014. So I have never lobbied for any federal legislation. I was able to work with legislators in Washington State, though, to get some legislation passed here in Washington related to DNA collection, and that law is actually named after those two girls. So it's called Jennifer and Michelle's law.
So currently, I work in legislative affairs, Secretary of Defense's office on legislative affairs, and I've really had a chance to see how both parties, work their constituents to get an agenda across. And what I've noticed, and I'm curious to hear your comment on this, is the right is about law and order. That's one of their main political talking points is law and order. Yet, if you want more DNA collection, you're having to give up some of those civil liberties. Where would you balance between those two?
Yeah. So the funny thing is that you're actually not giving up any liberties. I mean, the laws that are currently on the books, they've been in place for decades. So it's not like it's not like we're saying you need to somehow collect DNA from somebody who ordinarily wouldn't have to provide it. These people were ordered by a judge to provide it as a result of their judgment and sentence or their conviction or their arrest, and they just haven't done it.
Oh wow.
So yeah, this is not like it's going outside the reach of the government or anything like that. These laws have been in place for years. So it's the problem is that no one has really ever done a thorough you know, census nationwide to figure out how many people actually owe DNA. It would be incredibly difficult to do that because none of the systems that contain that information talk to each other. So it's a problem. And there are very few states that are taking advantage of federal funding to address this issue. There is federal funding available for law enforcement agencies to actually address this issue. But like currently, I believe there are only 15 um, agencies nationwide that are taking advantage of federal funding to do this work.
Well, there you go. I
15.
think you have your follow-on career. You could be an advocate for the grants and getting some of these other communities aware of what's out there.
Yeah, yeah. It's pretty horrific, and I mean, I've come up with example after example after example of these horrific offenders who slip through the cracks, right? And they either died in prison, maybe they sat in prison for 30 plus years, never had their DNA collected, and then when it's finally collected, boom, you know, they hit to all these cold cases. Well, you know, those cold cases, the families have been waiting years and years and years for some answer. Law enforcement has been spinning their wheels for years, if not decades, spending thousands and tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars to investigate these cases when they could have been solved decades earlier with a simple CODIS hit.
I felt terrible when finishing off the book where you were talking about the father just saying, "I don't have a lot of time."
Mm-hmm.
I mean, of course, you in law enforcement and your fellow colleagues that have spent all this time investigating this, but for the father, I mean, can you talk us through that? How, I mean,
Yeah, I mean, that's the hardest part about these cases. And I think for myself personally, that's what was really a motivating factor for me to try to solve a lot of the cases that I worked on was that I knew there was a, you know, a family waiting, right? That, you know, and just because it had been 30 years, it doesn't mean that it was any less painful for them. It's not like they forgot about it. So with Jennifer Bastian's case, there was a scene that I, you know, talked about in the book where my partner and I had gone to their home to actually get some photos of Jennifer for that case review that we did in Alexandria at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And as we were leaving, Jennifer's father, you know, grabbed onto my partner and you know, with tears in his eyes, said, you know, I don't have much time left. You know, I need you to find out what happened to my baby girl. And it was heart wrenching. It was God, you know, it's one of those things where you just like it, you know, just not that I didn't know it was real before, but when you are looking straight at somebody, looking at a family member, and they're just begging you to please, you know, give them some answers. And those answers don't necessarily mean that somebody needs to be arrested and charged. With a lot of these cold cases, yeah, that's the ultimate goal. But even if the offender's dead, they want to know. They want to know that the police didn't forget about them. They want to know that their loved one is important, and you know they want to know that somebody is still working on it. And so sometimes that can be just as important and meaningful to family members as someone being convicted.
you mentioning that part of the reason why I'm coming up with this podcast. And I mean, I joke around and say, look, I don't have the face for television and I don't have the voice for radio, but I have the passion for people and stories. And in the military, there's so many amazing stories and people want to be validated and understood. So it seems very
Mhm.
similar that these families, even though they know their son or daughter is never coming back, the validation of knowing that you did what you could is bringing some
Yeah,
comfort to them.
absolutely. And even with you know, living victims of, you know, sexual assault cases, you know, I've had victims who have told me that, you know, it was just so important for them to know that they hadn't been forgotten and that someone was actually working on their case, even if we weren't able to solve it. Just the fact that we took the time to reach out to them and to talk to them was, you know, hugely impactful. So it's not always, you know, necessarily traditional win, so to speak, with, putting somebody in handcuffs or, sending someone to prison. Sometimes it's just that human connection, right?
You built the hook in the book talking about you as a child and some of these similar things happening to you. Having a daughter of your own now, I, I would just be so continuously fearful at all times because you see all this darkness. How do you balance it? How do you look at your daughter and of course you love her and want her to be safe and successful, but at the same time you see all this darkness. How do you balance that out?
It's hard. When she was younger, it was pretty scary. When we first moved to Tacoma, she was about 6, I think, when we moved to Tacoma. And prior to that, we lived out way out in the country, and it was rural, and not a lot of kids around, and so she was pretty contained. And then we moved to this neighborhood similar to a neighborhood I grew up in, and there's kids everywhere, right? And they're like running up and down the streets and on their bikes, and going this way and that way. And I mean, it was like sensory overload for me when we first moved in, because I was like, no, I've got to have like line of sight, uh, you know, all at all times. And over time, that's let up some, but she's only 14. Um, so it has taken a lot for me to try to figure out how to balance not scaring the shit out of her, with keeping her safe, and teaching her about safety and that kind of thing. And she's a smart kid, so we try to sort of lessen the likelihood that she might be vulnerable, or could be victimized. But at the end of the day, you can't keep them under wraps. you know you can't keep them with you 24/7. So at some point, you just have to trust uh, in what you've instilled in them about safety, and being aware of your surroundings, and yeah, kind of the buddy system. Don't go places by yourself. And but now with the phones and the internet and chat rooms and TikTok and, like, all the things, Roblox, and all the ways that these people can communicate with kids, it's pretty frightening. And so having those conversations with your kids and trying to stay up to date on what kind of apps they're using and how they're accessing information is like almost like a full-time job. And that's even more scary, I think, than like sending them outside on the street to play, because there's so much information that people can gather off the internet, and kids don't necessarily understand that someone who says they're a 15-year-old boy on Roblox might be a 50-year-old dude living in his mom's basement, who's a predator. So that's the balancing act.
So, her being a 14-year-old, what if she comes to mom and dad and says, I'm fascinated with law enforcement as well. Just seeing the two of you and having so much passion for your job. What do you say to her if she wants to be involved in law enforcement?
I say go with the fire department.
Go with the
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to support her in whatever she wants to do, but um, just knowing. I mean, I loved my career, and I thought it was amazing, but it's dangerous, right? Like, no parent wants their kid to be involved in a career where they could potentially be killed, or, you know, seriously injured, or just aside from the physical demands of it, there's also like the psychological toll of working on these kinds of cases, and just seeing like horrific things all the time. It can definitely skew your um, thought process, and it can definitely sort of make you think that everybody's a bad guy, right? Like, I don't, and so for as a parent, like, I don't want my kid to have to deal with that. I want her to, do something that makes her happy, and hopefully, I just have told her, think when you start thinking about careers, try to come up with ideas about things that you really enjoy, because you want to be able to go to work every day and enjoy what you do. if you have to go to work every day and you hate it, it's going to be a long career.
Yeah, just during those cases that you describe in the book, there you must have had some 100-hour work weeks. Some of them that you were describing. What was a typical work week like when you were in the heat of an investigation?
It depends. If it was one of the cases in the book was a child abduction uh, that happened on the 4th of July. And that one, we basically didn't have days off. We just kept on working, just, 15, probably 15, 16-hour days every day. Um, and so it kind of depends. And, with my work, I typically worked as a detective, like a day shift, Monday through Friday was my assigned schedule, but, crime doesn't happen Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. So we had on call rotation. So, you'd work your regular shift, but then you'd be on call. And if you got called out, you could be out all weekend, on a call out because you don't just go out, take a report, and go home. You just work, you keep working the case. So, it's a lot. It's a lot of work. And to be honest, I was on call for about 14 years straight, and I just got completely burned out with being on call because even when you're not working and you have a day off, when you're on call, you can't really do anything. You know, you can't go too far away. You need to be able to respond within a reasonable amount of time. You need to have all your gear with you. Blah blah blah. So just it really it does take an impact, make an impact on your personal life. And when my daughter was younger, I don't maybe she was like 4 or 5. I remember getting called out one night and going up to say goodbye to her, and she's just like, Mom, don't go, please don't go, I don't want you to go. And it was just like heartbreaking, and there were a few times like that where um I'd be putting her to bed and she, does like, please don't leave, I don't want you to go. And so that, yeah, that gets to be tough.
During the when you make detective, is it based on salary? Are you still an hourly employee and you're getting overtime, or you're getting comp
Yeah.
time for that? Or because in the military, you can work a 24-hour day and that's just all you're getting. There's no additional overtime renewing.
Yeah. So yeah, detectives were hourly, so we got overtime, and you could either take it as overtime or as comp time. So yeah, you're getting paid, but there's a toll, and there's a cost associated with that.
You I know we were texting before this, and it's when when I describe Tacoma to people, they think, is it just a bunch of murderers and serial killers? Because we have a lot of very famous, prolific serial killers from our area. So what is it? What's going on there?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, yes, we've had our share, like in I would say the Pacific Northwest, right? Like we've had Bundy, Ridgeway, Yates, Dodd. Uh, well, we have a whole bunch from this area, but I mean, all the other big states do too. It's just why maybe they're more popular, they're the most more notorious. I don't know. We have two of the big five from Washington alone with Bundy and Ridgeway, so um, but yeah, I mean, people that are not from here, even in Washington, people are like, "Ugh, Tacoma, scary." I mean, I don't think it's that scary, but I've been to a lot of cities and traveled, to a lot of other places that are actually, yeah, you know, far worse, I would say. Yeah, there's certain parts of Tacoma that I wouldn't hang out in and, wouldn't want my daughter hanging out in. But I mean, I think that's pretty much every city.
Just for the listeners that don't know us or don't know the background that I was sharing with you before, is that I ran in the park, Point Defiance Park, with my dad on those trails, and
Mm.
we noticed a strange odor. Of course, we didn't know what it was, but as the city started to come down into lockdown, To think that we were running in that particular part of the park and had no idea. And then also the other investigation that I believe you said is still under investigation, that was over by my dad's house. I used to walk in that gulch by that park all the time. And as a young boy, I never thought about my personal safety as those things were happening. And then I was telling you
Mhm.
before that my stepmom went to high school with Ted Bundy. And then
Yeah.
my grandmother's husband, he worked at the Kenworth trucking plant with the Green River Killer. I'm like, how does all this stuff come together? And people start looking at me like, hey man, maybe it's you. And I said, oh, just to put icing on the cake, we used to go to the shooting range where the DC sniper bought his firearm when he was stationed in Fort Lewis. So it's just like one thing after another. So yeah, when I
Oh yeah.
described Tacoma and living in Lakewood when I was stationed at McCord Air Force Base, and of course seeing it on cops all the time, people are like, "That's where you live?" That's
Yeah.
so
I mean, what is it? What's the phrase? Is it like 6 degrees of separation?
something like that.
In Tacoma, it's like 2 degrees of separation. I swear, because there's always a connection. Like you can't go anywhere without somebody saying they went to school with Ted Bundy or their mom or their grandma. Somebody. I mean, my mom knew his mom because she worked in the office at University of Puget Sound, and that's where my mom went to college. Um, so yeah, there's all these connections. It's not really a small town, but it kind of is a small town.
Yeah. Well, I enjoyed in your book the part where you started off at Western Washington University up in Bellingham,
Mhm.
and then you
Yep.
decided to come home. What was it? What was that draw to come back home?
I don't think I was really ready to be on my own at that point. I missed home. I missed my family and friends, and so I just didn't really. It wasn't my place. Like I felt like just a number up there at Western. It was like such a big school, and so spread out, and kind of a lonely place. So I didn't. Yeah, it just wasn't my thing, and so um, I decided to come back home and enroll at a community college. And then once I finished up there, I ended up going to Central Washington University, but also here in Lakewood. So one of their satellite branches. And then I got hired with the police department after my first semester, I think, first quarter or first semester at Central.
You also mentioned that being first of all a young woman and a woman of color was a very difficult transition on the police department. How was that? Is that improved throughout your career?
Um, yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that I feel like every generation of women sort of like paved the way for the next generation where, things are a little bit easier and a little bit better. Some of the things that my mentors dealt with when they came on the police department in the 70s would just absolutely blow your mind. And, um, I feel like I didn't really have to deal with anything crazy like that. But um, I would say things were a much more overt back then. And, I mean, there's always going to be, guys in a career, especially in a law enforcement career that, maybe, I don't know, don't think women belong or don't think women can do the job as well as men or whatever. But I think that for now, at least in this area, I mean, if there are guys that think that way, they tend to keep it to themselves or keep it with their close friends. There are a lot more women, doing the job these days, and so I think that it's gotten better, for women. But I think that there's always going to be a degree of, and it's probably similar in the military. I'm sure it's similar in firefighting, really any male-dominated field. I do feel like women need to, whether they need to or they have to, sort of prove themselves. Um, and I don't know if that'll ever change, but I do think that women aren't just like accepted off the bat. Like you have to prove that you can actually do the job before you're truly accepted.
We have a mutual friend. He'll remain nameless just because I don't know if he wants the story public or not. But his police department, he said there was a lot of hazing, and they were really hard on him just based on rank. Yeah, I've been here longer than you, so you got to take it. You got to take the jokes. You got to take whatever. And so I think he said, 8 to 10 years or so on the force, he decided to just retire because he said, "Hey, I mean, can't we just be grown-ups and work
Mhm.
together without the rubbing but or ribbing?" But I don't know if that's department to department or if it's just part of the culture, because I imagine it is similar to the military. You got a lot of folks with a lot of testosterone and working out. You got to
Mhm.
maintain that physical strength because you're in all these confrontations. um
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think that probably from the public perception, there's this idea that there's like this thin blue line, and all the cops get along, and they all would do anything for each other, and that's just not the case.
yeah.
I mean, if you saw like the inner workings of a police department, most of the cops hate each other. They don't get along. Or they have like their small group of people that they're close with, but it's cutthroat. It's a cutthroat job. I think there's a lot of I don't know what the word is, and I can only speak to the agencies that I work for. I don't know what all agencies are like, but it's not an easy environment. It's not like you get hired and there's like you're welcomed with open arms, and everybody wants to welcome you and teach you everything and take you under their wing, and it's not like that at all.
You just added another level of stress that I didn't think about. The standpoint of you could have internal conflicts in the department, but then also you're forced to make these life or death split decision. Um, uh, what's the term I'm looking for? These decisions between life or death between. Help me out here. I'm stumbled on what I'm trying to say.
Oh, like if you're out on a call
Yeah,
or
you're out on a call
something.
and something can go wrong, something can escalate to the point where violence is involved, and these second decisions could end your career and somebody's life. You could be
Hmm.
at fault. So here you are trying to deal with the conflict of not necessarily having the best relationship with the folks on your team, but also you have to deal with the community that a lot of times they're out there with their phones trying to,
Hmm.
catch you guys doing something wrong. Whereas we all know 99.9% of you are just doing the best that you can.
Yeah. Yeah, lots of there's lots of internal um, pressure and stress, and then you have the external pressure and stress of just the job itself and the cases, and um, so yeah, it can be a lot.
So if you hadn't joined the force, what would you have done as a young woman?
That's all I wanted to do. So I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't gotten hired with the police department. I think looking like if I could go back now um, and do it over again, I probably would have done the same thing. I mean, I always feel like there's a reason for everything, and you know, choices that we make might not be completely clear at the moment why this is the right path, but at some point, it starts to make sense, and so um, I would probably do it all the same again.
I completely agree with you. Right now, there's a lot of cancer research studies going on in the military, and one of my friends is dealing with stage 4 cancer, and he's battling through chemotherapy. And he's a young guy like me. I'm 49. I think he's 48, and he says, "Mike, I'm not going to make it." Um, and so talking to my wife, I said, I've been exposed to all the same things that he has: burn pits overseas, flying airplanes and high altitude is a lot of radiation exposure, and then working in the missile silos with my friend that has stage 4 cancer. I still think to myself, I still wouldn't change anything. I
Hmm.
I love the job. I love the mission. I love giving back. I love serving. And so I if that if that conversation happens and I go to the doctor and that's what Mike said, please go get chest X-rays, get blood tests, figure out if if there's a possibility of this happening to you, and of course that's horrible, and I feel for Mike, um, but I still don't think I would change. I think I would continue
Yeah.
with the mission, and for you to see these poor children just it just brought up a lot of emotion in me, listening and reading your book. Um, but it's nice to know that you wouldn't change.
Somebody's got to do it, and not everyone is cut out to investigate, especially crimes against children. Um, and so, if there are people that are interested in that, want to work the cases and have a passion for it, then there's got to be people like that, right? And I don't think you should do it forever. I certainly was not cut out to do it forever. At some point, you have to recognize, that it's time to move on, and that it's taking a toll on you mentally, but. Um, yeah, every I want to know that if something ever happened to me or one of my loved ones, that there's a detective out there that actually gives a shit and is going to work their ass off to try to solve the case.
As I was reading the book and I was reading some of the language, I was like, "Oh my god, this is so Lindsay." I could literally see you saying these things as you're writing the book. I mean, I could the passion was coming out and the language is coming out, and I started thinking about the cackling laugh when we were young, and it just
Yeah.
you described Lakewood, and I told my wife, I was like, actually, Lindsay and I walked around the mall one day at the Lakewood Mall. Would you walk around that same mall today?
I don't even think it exists anymore.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah, Lakewood has
But
some interesting pockets.
it does. Yeah, it absolutely does.
I was trying to think of the last time I saw you besides the award ceremony for the Tacoma Mall shooting, and when I was a medic at the hospital, I think you
Yep.
came in a couple times, and one of the folks that came in was one of our high school classmates, and I just felt terrible for her. So obviously maintaining PII and the professionalism of all of it. I felt terrible that I was in the hospital, of course, there to help, but at the same time, as a personal friend growing up with. Is there any personal friends or colleagues that you had to experience something similar?
Um, I mean, I definitely, ran into people that I knew from time to time, just, on calls and things like that when I was in patrol. Um, I didn't, luckily, I don't think I was ever in a position where I, had to investigate a case that involved someone that I knew well, anything like that. But, uh, I definitely was put in a position when I was a homicide detective to investigate officer involved shootings. And so, those are very challenging. And, you're investigating your own officers, on your department. And so that, can be an interesting dynamic to say the least. And I think since, since I left, they sort of changed that and they have a team, a regional team that does those investigations now. And so I don't think that officers from the same agency are the lead investigators for that agency any longer, which I think is a good thing because it is difficult, to investigate your own uh, team members, basically.
That segues into my conversation about Sean. I'm actually wearing his shirt that his brother had made after his passing. We had a lot of conversations. For the listeners out there, we were roommates together. We worked at the hospital together. We went to the gym together. He introduced me to my wife. So he would always joke and say, Mike, your life and happiness is all owed to me, and he's absolutely right. But when he had to take somebody's life in the line of duty, he was really struggling, and he knew that in my job I had similar stories. So we had a lot of heartfelt conversations about taking lives, and there's a lot of things that we have to do that morally we obviously struggle with, and he couldn't get over it. We talked about it over and over and over again. And then he'd always been a social drinker, and then he just started drinking more and more, to the point where he came to visit us at our house, and we had some vodka in the freezer, and he drank the whole bottle. um, and would be totally lucid, normal conversations. I mean, you wouldn't even think anything of it. And so I just started to get concerned, to the point where after that trip, he went home, and I told my wife Heather, I said, "Look, I'm very concerned about him. Somebody might need to do a welfare check, because of the drinking and just abusing his body." And then it just started to escalate, because he was on the SWAT team, and I think he said he injured his knee or he injured his shoulder, and he couldn't participate with the SWAT team, so he was losing his identity. So
Mm.
he says, not only have I taken a life in the line of duty, but now I'm not part of that team, um, that I've been a part of for the last X amount of years. And it was almost like thinking of somebody being a professional athlete that can't do that job anymore, and how do they settle into a different role. um so every time I was down or hard on myself, he would be like, "Mike, snap out of it." He's like, "My God, you're a colonel in the Air Force, and you're a pilot, and you fly airplanes, you do all these amazing things, and you got this amazing wife and these two kids." And he would really help me snap out of it. And I just have this internal guilt that I didn't help him snap out of it. Um, did he have a community, a support community of friends? Because now that you told me a lot of police officers don't get along, or not necessarily close. Once he couldn't do the SWAT thing, did you see a change? Did anybody notice a difference?
Well, I was gone from the department since 2018. I mean, I retired, so I wasn't. And even when I was there, I was a detective, and so detectives are very separated from patrol. So, I mean, I might pass Sean in the hallway on occasion, or see him on a call out or something like that here and there, but it was very infrequent. Um, but I know that there was a lot of camaraderie, and I mean, he was well liked, and he had a lot of friends on the department. So, um, and my understanding is that there were a lot of people that reached out to try to help him over the years, and a lot of people that really cared deeply for him, which was pretty evident at his memorial. So I don't think that he was, off on his own. I think there were a lot of people that tried, um, over the years to try to help him, and you just never know what's going on inside somebody else's head.
I don't mean this to turn into a therapy session. It's just, for me, it's therapeutic to talk to somebody that knows and knew Sean. Um, I was working in the Pentagon, and I got a text message from Tony, and I don't know if you've met Tony, and he said, call me. So I call Tony, and he says, Sean's gone. I'm like, what are you talking about? And he said, Sean took his own life. And then I thought, he's a Tacoma police officer. He lives in Tacoma. Now his own colleagues are responding to
Hmm.
this call. Um, I, I, I can't imagine
Yeah.
having to respond to a colleague, that has taken their own life.
yeah, I can't imagine that either, honestly. I don't luckily, I was never put into a position like that, but yeah, I can't imagine.
I I still feel guilty to this day, and I know it was completely out of my, my own control, but the family asked me to be a pallbearer. And so I'm flying out there, and we have terrible weather in DC, thunderstorms. So they canceled the flight, and then they tried to push me to a Texas flight, and they tried to push me to another flight, and then they lost my luggage, and so I couldn't even get on a different flight because my uniform and everything was in the luggage. And I kept trying to tell them, I
Mm,
said, please, whatever you can do. I'm literally a pallbearer at a funeral. I really need to get there, and I couldn't get there, and I felt like I let his family down. I let friends down that I couldn't be there, and of course everybody understands that it was out of my control. But I just to not have that chance to say goodbye. Um,
yeah,
it was it was hard. Um, And I know, I mean,
yeah.
we've all got our faults. Sean's got plenty of faults. I got plenty of faults, but he was just such a amazing, charismatic, funny guy. I always told him, I'm like, man, you should have a freaking podcast. You are the funniest guy because not only are you witty and remarkably intelligent, but you just have this aura about you that everybody just loves to joke around with you. So yeah. Anyway, not trying to make it a
Yeah.
therapy session. Just it's so nice. It's so nice to talk to somebody that at least knew him, whether you dealt with him a lot professionally or not. We had such good times at the hospital. That yeah, missed the guy.
Yeah, he was a good guy. I was not close with Sean, personally. I mean, of course, we were friendly with each other. I probably was interacted with him more off duty, just from like at SWAT functions, because my husband was on the SWAT team with him.
Yeah.
So
So the reason I bring that up is that I had this emotional attachment that I don't know if I'll ever get rid of, and it makes me feel good to talk to others about it. Um, but do you have a similar emotional attachment to these cases?
yeah, there's some cases that they just kind of, I'm sure that I'll think about them forever. And to be quite honest, it was, I think, 2014 when I finally decided that maybe I should talk to a professional, and reached out to a psychologist and started seeing him. And honestly, it was like the best thing I ever did. At that time, it was pretty taboo within the police department to, nobody talked about PTSD, nobody talked about trauma, vicarious trauma. None of those things were spoken about. The most we had was those critical incident stress debriefings after, some major event, which was, kind of few and far between. But it doesn't, those, I didn't find those helpful. And they certainly didn't address like the chronic day in, day out. You know, like when you're working sex crimes, and especially crimes against children, like it's horrific stuff that you're dealing with on a day in and day out basis. So I'm, I finally decided that I was going to do something for myself, and that was honestly the best thing I think that I could have done. And I'm happy to hear that it took a long time for the department to finally come around, but I think it was 2016 maybe, that the police department finally brought in a psychologist, and now they have a psychologist on staff, and he's available to all the officers on the department, and so that's huge. That message coming from the top down, that it's okay, that you're encouraged to actually talk to somebody, rather than waiting, right? Like, I think there's always been this especially in law enforcement, this idea that you have to be tough and you can't show weakness and you can't show emotion and you have to tamp all your emotions down and be a professional. Well, that's true. You do have to do that while you're doing your job. You can't break down crying at a crime scene, right?
Mhm.
But at some point, like you have to deal with this shit. It's not you can't just bottle it up and just pretend like it doesn't affect you because it does. So I'm glad to hear that things are changing in law enforcement. I think a lot of agencies are taking a similar approach. There are so many more resources out there for law enforcement officers and firefighters, first responders in general now. Um, and so I think that's good to see that, sort of the attitudes are changing and it's not so um, frowned upon. It's not taboo, to actually reach out and say, like I need some help here. I need somebody to talk to. I'm struggling, whatever the situation is.
If it's not too emotional for you, can you walk us through the Tiger Mountain scenario?
Um, so well, so that was a case that I worked on, and that was a little girl that was abducted and murdered. Um, we followed the guy up to Tiger Mountain. He actually ended up dumping her clothing up there, but we didn't find her up there. We ended up finding her um, at a lake in Pierce County, and he had actually ended up leading us to her body. And so, yeah, I mean that was pretty horrific, especially after getting called out to investigate 4th of July. 9, 10 o'clock at night. We've got this missing 12-year-old. She's possibly been abducted. And then, to work the case nonstop basically for, I think it was 8 days um, before, we got the offender to lead us to her body. Um, and that case just in and of itself was surreal on multiple levels. But yeah, it was terrible. To see, to hope, have all this hope for all those days that we're going to find this child. She, hopefully she's alive. Maybe she's, just being held somewhere. And, the intent, of course, is to try to find the child and rescue them and bring them home to their families. And, um, you know, when that doesn't happen, it's heartbreaking.
If I'm trying to think as how to phrase this question. As I was reading the book, I kept thinking to myself, I was trying to develop I was trying to develop I was trying to develop a profile. I thought, okay, are these people? Do they have a troubled background? But your stories talked about, white sex predators, black sex predators, Hispanic sex predators, Asian sex predators. Is there any profile out there that, or was there any commonality anywhere that you saw with these individuals?
Other than they were predators, no.
No, like
I mean,
abuse as a child, or
well, some of them, had those things in their histories, but to say that that was the causal factor, I'm not, I wouldn't say that. These were all extremely disturbed
Mhm.
individuals for a variety of reasons, right? Like we could go through their criminal histories and look at their backgrounds, and they all had, severe behavioral issues. But no, there's no like one common, thread, and there's no, um, one type, right? There's lots of types, and there's lots of reasons and motivations behind why these, certain offenders do what they do. They choose different victims. They operate differently depending on the situation. So so many things. But I guess after working sex crimes and homicide for years, there's sort of like a gut. gut feeling that you get. And I mean, I can read a police report, or someone can tell me what the facts are, and pretty much instantly I can tell you like that's a serial offender just by hearing the facts of the case. Because there's just certain things that stand out that are very abnormal.
The one that was the most disturbing to me was the high school wrestler.
Mm, yeah.
What vibe was there? Anything that caused the hairs on the back of your neck to stand up? I know that you said that when you went to investigate him, his mom was saying had some excuse that he was sick or upset or anything. Was there any other tells? Because me personally, having a 17-year-old son myself, I can't imagine. That was the one that
Yeah.
was really
So
disturbing to me.
yeah. Um, so I never actually interacted with him. So I don't know, but I know just from, what I was told by the other investigators that right off the bat, when he, was like, I think the first time they went to get a swab from him, and his mom said he was too upset, to, right then and there, they're like, he's 17 years old. I mean, yeah, he seems overly upset for the circumstances. So that was kind of like a red flag to begin with. And then when they went back, um, the second time they ended up getting the swab from him, but there was nothing about him. No one in the neighborhood reported that he behaved suspiciously or that he was doing inappropriate things with the kids or nothing like that. I mean, there was, obviously he had things going on in his head um, that were unknown to everybody else that knew him, including his family and friends. But yeah, it was. I mean, I was surprised to everybody.
Out of all the cold cases that you've solved, obviously the Point Defiance Park being kind of the feather in your cap. What other one do you take a lot of pride from your? I almost felt like you should be a lawyer. I mean, you are just the way you describe the investigation and the sticky notes and the continuous of asking of questions. What other case sticks out to you as meaningful, the most meaningful?
Uh, well, so there's a one that's more recent that actually isn't in the book because it just got solved. That I'm, you know, very happy about, and this was, I mentioned earlier that we got a law passed in Washington called Jennifer and Michelle's Law, and it expands our DNA collection law to allow DNA samples from deceased offenders to be entered into CODIS, regardless of the conviction date. And prior to the law, if someone was convicted of like a rape or a murder before 1990, they did not qualify to go into the DNA database, which really makes no sense when you think about it from a cold case perspective, because law enforcement is investigating cold cases from the 70s, 80s, even earlier. But if we don't have the offenders in CODIS who were operating during that time frame, then we're missing out, right? Like we're missing out on solving cases. So that was really a big motivation for me to get that piece of that legislation passed so that we could enter these guys that were operating back in the 70s and 80s. So once that law passed in 2019, and it took us 4 years. So it was 4 years of going down to Olympia, testifying in front of various legislative committees, educating legislators on our DNA laws and what the shortcomings were, and finally in 2019 getting it passed. So once it passed, I had somebody in mind, an offender in mind, who was executed in Washington in 1994. He was convicted of aggravated first degree murder times three. So he was actually a rapist who sexually assaulted a woman, like blitz attacked her and her infant daughter at her home. He went to prison, got sentenced to 30 years, but he got out after less than 6 years. and he was living in a halfway house, like not too far from where she lived. Unbeknownst to her, he was out. He came back and basically committed a triple homicide, revenge murder, murdered her, her 8-year-old daughter, and her neighbor who had testified against him at his trial. So this guy is like the spawn of Satan, basically. I mean, he's like the worst of the worst. And so he was my poster child when I would, talk about how we needed to change the legislation in Washington because I was like, this dude needs to be in CODIS. He's not in there. He doesn't even qualify, so he needs to go in. And so he was my number one target once we got the law passed. I was able to track down a sample of his DNA from his autopsy. And I literally hand delivered a sample from the autopsy to the crime lab. And then I didn't hear anything. And so I just assumed it went into CODIS and there were no matches, but like it didn't really surprise me. And then 3 years later, I get a phone call from a cold case detective in Seattle. And this was December of 2023. And he calls me up out of the blue and says, hey, I just got a hit to Charles Campbell on a 1975 cold case murder of a UW student, graduate student from UW. And it was like, holy shit, I cannot even believe this. This is insane. But it's like, right there, it's like, okay, this is validation that this is why, I keep talking about missing offender samples and CODIS and lawfully owed DNA. And that family finally has some answers. And yeah, he's not going to be prosecuted. He's already been executed by the state. He was actually the last person in Washington to be hanged. But, now the family knows who did it. And now the law enforcement agency can stop spinning their wheels, investigating a case that, could be solved with a CODIS hit.
Wow. I still think that you have room to be a lobbyist out here in DC and help educate our legislators to make this more of a national thing rather than such a local thing. Because, like you said, even though that person has already been executed for crimes committed, you're closing cases that allow families closure. So that's got to mean a lot. So. And hey, I'm out here in DC, so I live in Fairfax. So next time you're out here,
I was just out there. Like 2 weeks ago.
Well, you've got to hit me up because as of right now, I'm at the Pentagon every day, all day, but retiring here soon. And I just there's so many fascinating people out there that have written such interesting books, or whether that's law enforcement, first responders, military. I just really enjoy getting to know people from a side that I never knew. So you sharing with me, and I'm sure everybody in Tacoma has already read your book, and so I'm one of the last to find out about it since I don't live in that area anymore. But I have a lot of fond memories of you, and the book, it really touched me. I know we're talking through a computer, but I hope you can feel it really touched me. And I'm not saying that just because you're a friend. I'm saying that because it's a good book. So please plug your book.
Yes.
Plug your book. Talk about your book. What's it called?
It's called In My DNA, My Career Investigating Your Worst Nightmares. Probably don't read it if you're home alone. My daughter has asked to read it, and I told her she couldn't read it till she was 30. So it's not for the faint of heart. It's not for young kids. It's real, scary shit that really happened. So you can get it anywhere that they sell books. It's on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. If you just Google Lindsey Wade, you'll find it.
And then I told you I got the audiobook and the Kindle. And it's so good. I'm so glad we had a chance to talk about this. And so next time you are in DC, please reach out to me because I am just trying to build upon these stories, because I think that even if this just impacts one person that decides to join law enforcement, or one person that starts that wants to be a data scientist in the DNA world, or Hopefully, your book provides inspiration for somebody else to continue this path, and hopefully, we get some
Absolutely.
legislation that goes across the country. So that's why I think you need to come out here and
Oh,
help lobby.
I know. We definitely need some federal statutes because that's the problem with DNA legislation is that each state makes their own DNA legislation, and so it's haphazard. It's all over the board.
Well, thank you, Lindsay. What else can you think of that
Thank
I?
you.
What else can you think of that I didn't ask? What's your fondest memory of us in junior high and high school? Is there anything that you
Gosh.
remember?
Oh my God. Let me think about this. So it was funny, but right before this, I was like, I'm pretty sure I have a picture somewhere of you and I at like a Tolo or something like that, maybe wearing the same same shirt or
Okay.
something like that. I'm gonna have to go through my scrapbook, but yeah, definitely remember hanging out in the neighborhood. Um, I think I had my crazy brother and sister who were a lot younger at the time, like running around
Yeah.
at the house.
Well, I am
Oh my
so
gosh.
proud of you, and it's nice to know such a successful young woman that went out there and made it on her own and kicked ass. I still don't know how you found time to get married and have a kid when you guys work all those hours, but I'm glad you've found your life partner and you guys are doing well. And we need to
Oh,
keep in touch. So next time you're in the DC area, please stop by because my wife, she loved the book. She's like, oh my god, this is so good. And I said, well, maybe I can
oh,
set up an extra microphone or camera. She's like, no, you talk to her since you guys are friends. But she's like, just tell her how much I love the book. So
oh. Well, thank you so much, and please leave me a review on Amazon or Goodreads because that's like the best way to get sales. So
absolutely,
appreciate it.
I will. Thank you so much, Lindsay.
All right,
I'll
thanks.
talk to you later.
Okay,
Bye.
bye.